So let me explain. In this month of May, I imposed a challenge on myself, which I like to do sometimes, you know? I'm not just related to reading, but just doing something specific, like limiting yourself for a month. That's just something that I find very appealing. And in this month, I challenged myself to read 3,000 pages. So that's about a little bit less than 100 pages a day, because we have 31 days and today's the last day. And as you can see by this shelf behind me, I did go pretty hard. It's almost kind of embarrassing, but I guess reading was like my number one priority this month. And one reason I did this was because in May we have a lot of holidays and I didn't have a lot of lectures. I had plenty of free time, but neither enough time nor the money to really like go on a holiday or something like that. So I thought I'd just stay at home and just read a ton of books. And I did. I am neurodivergent, and I guess I did kind of hyperfixate. I pretty much spent most of my time this month reading, I would say. And so yeah, I think I got like 18 books or something, and I think this is too many books for one video, so I'm gonna make 2 videos. I think I'll just walk you through, like, I'm gonna sort them not chronologically, but from least favorite to favorite, and then I'll show you the first few in this video, and then I'll make another video for my favorite ones. So without further ado, let's go into them. So, let's start with 2 books I didn't actually read. I'm not big on DNFing books, usually. I think last year I DNF'd like one single book. But this month we're actually, well, this one I didn't even start reading, because this is not really actually a book. This is like a scammy AI slob thing. I made a separate clip about this, which I'm gonna show you now, but this is it's completely AI generated, and it's not readable. So okay, I just wanted to show you something curious as like a little intermezzo here. So I used to be, or still am, very much interested in numerology, which leans into like the esoteric kind of side of things, and it's, you can think of it, if you never heard of it, kind of like tarot cards or astrology, that kind of stuff. I just well, it's very hard on a weird niche topic like this to find like actual literature, because it's, numerology is based on mathematics. Like it's it might seem a little bit out there, but it is definitely based, I'm not saying it's scientific, I'm just saying it's based on scientific principles. And I had this book for a long time, and it didn't look very appealing, and it's I already DNF'd it after like 3 pages, and I googled the author, and it's an AI scam. This is a book written by AI, which I came across once before, but yeah, the author has a Goodreads profile, and it's absolutely wild what's on there, and I just kind of wanted to share that with you. All kinds of different stuff, like numerology stuff. Then he got vegan food for starters, but then also my favorite meat dishes, deep learning AI technology, and then how to get financially free, the way I got, like typical like scam bait, I guess. And also, yeah, just like some like erotic fiction. I don't really want to say this on here, but just look at that. well, it's a shame I paid money for this book. Yes, look, it has like giant font. It randomly changes font, like sometimes even in the middle of it. So yeah, this in the worst way possible, this is a curiosity. I think I'm actually just gonna throw this away because I don't wanna give it away to someone because then they're gonna read this, and it's not even really even readable. Well, that's also part of collecting books, and I just thought it was kind of funny and I wanted to share it with you. Yes. And then I remove my little note thing here. The Sri Isopanisad by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, or something like that. This is actually the book that has been on my TBR for the longest time. I bought this from a monk that approached me like, I think like 12, 13 years ago, something like that. Me and my friend, and we both bought this book from him, and he was like, like the classic like bald monk, and I think he was even wearing like the monk's robe that they're wearing, and I've just put this on my shelf and I never actually started reading it. So it's not really Buddhist, it's more Hinduist, I think. Well, and I didn't know a whole lot about this, but another theme of this month's reading was to just like get to stuff that has been on my pile for ages and ages, like to the deepest parts of that pile. And yeah, this is by far the book I've had the longest, and sadly, I just could not bear to read it. I think I got 26 pages in, and it's, yeah, I hope this is not disrespectful to anyone. It probably will be, but I found this very, very extremely problematic. Like, it basically starts out going about like the caste system, which is basically just telling, yeah, we who are reading the book, and we monks and all of us spiritual people, we are obviously in the highest caste, and everybody else is worth less than we are. And it very openly also describes women, like all women in general, as like worth less than men, and like generally less intelligent. And I think over the first 26 pages, it told me to not question authority like 6 or 7 times. Like, oh, you should just take what's given to you, and you shouldn't question what's in this book. And it felt very, very indoctrinating. And it was always like, oh yeah, it's what God said, so you can question it, and it's what God said, and you can question it. And I found it very upsetting. And then the final straw was when it was talking, might sound kind of mundane, but when it was talking about how the cow gives milk for the human, and yeah, the cow produces the milk, but it doesn't drink the milk, so that means it's made for humans. And obviously, as a long time vegan, that really upset me, because obviously the baby cows drink the milk. It's stupid in my opinion. And so that I quit that book. Maybe someone else is gonna find wisdom in it, but that one is not gonna be me. Then, the Salmon Who Wanted to Swim to the Stars by Ando Hyun. I acquired this very recently. It's a very nice edition, like a hard cover with like nice illustrations in it. Unfortunately, the story really sucked. It started out kind of nice as like, like this innocent fairy tale like story about these, the salmons, how they have like this procession, and they swim from the river to the sea, and then they swim back, and they swim up the stream and up the waterfalls and stuff. And at first I didn't really mind that. It did kind of remind me of Jonathan Livingston Seagull, which is about a seagull who kind of goes against, goes like kind of outside the seagull box, and kind of discovers a new meaning to his life. But in my opinion, this was done pretty poorly, and these these fish reference all these human things. Like there's this really smart fish, and he goes into like the moon landing, and like all these human achievements, and I'm like, well, it breaks the immersion so much. It's talking about like people using chainsaws and cutting down trees, and it's so immersion breaking to talk about all these these human inventions that it doesn't make sense for them to be referenced in this book. It could have been a pretty good book, I think, if it would have stayed in like that nature or animal realm, but it didn't. Yeah, that's it. And then The Secret Life of Plants, Das geheime Leben der Pflanzen by Peter Tompkins and Christopher Bird. Translated by Eva and Matthias Güldenstein. Yeah, this is kind of a pseudoscience book about plants, and I don't really usually mind reading about pseudoscience. I think that kind of stuff gets criticized a lot from like the actual scientists and the people who are into actual science, but I generally think it's very interesting to explore concepts like kind of between spirituality and science, usually. But this book, I just kind of, the pseudo was a little bit too much, I would say, because it was going into this guy who did these experiments which no other scientist could replicate, and then he was just like, oh yeah, it's because you're not really feeling it, you gotta like connect to the plants on a spiritual level. And it's, you know, if no one can replicate your experiments, then I don't think they're really, you know, that's like the biggest no-no in science. And it was still kind of praising him as like this guy who made this giant discovery. And it was also going into, you know, they some scientists used a machine that L. Ron Hubbard created, like the founder of Scientology. And it was kind of, maybe it was just different times, but it did not in any way, it was kind of putting Scientology in a positive light, which I really did not like, because I think it's a manipulative capitalist cult. So yeah, that was also not quite my cup of tea, but that was my favorite of my least favorite ones, I would say. And yeah, I think I'll give these away. I feel bad about giving this away because it's not really even a readable book. So maybe I don't really want to throw it away, but if you have any idea on what to do with this, maybe I can turn this into an art project or something. But yeah. Okay, we're going like kind of into the middle ground. I'm sorry I put this here. I read Walden and Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau. This took me a very long time to read. And I just... You know, one thing, I still have a lot of trouble understanding literature from this period of time, being the mid-1800s. Yeah, I thought the more I read from this time, the easier it's going to be to understand, but it's not getting easier. Yeah, I mean, to me, this was just a guy living in the forest. He wasn't like, you know, he describes himself as like kind of like a hermit and like an adventurer, but he lived like a mile from his parents' house, you know. It's I don't really get what the whole deal was about. I mean, it's kind of cool that he built his own house and he was like kind of living self-sufficient, but he's not like an adventurer by any means, in my opinion. So yeah, but I think this is something that I'd like to come back to at some point, maybe in a couple of years. Maybe if this style of writing will get easier to me at some point, then I'll revisit it. And I would like to reread Civil Obedience, which is just like a short essay, because I read this late at night and I think I was like kind of falling asleep in the middle of it, and I don't think I could maybe get a little bit more out of that. Um, so yeah, we got Brighton Rock by Graham Greene. This I've gave this a pretty low rating, but it's not the book's fault. It's in this case I think I could acknowledge that the book was written really well. I liked the character of Pinky. I think I was just not in the right mindset for something like this. I did find it quite hard to read at times. But yeah, this is something that I'll also reread in a couple years because I could tell. It's weird. I've never really had this experience before. I could tell the book was not badly written at all. I just could not get into it for the life of it. And then in the end, I was kind of more interested in it, but I've hadn't previously paid enough attention to really get what was happening. So I looked at a plot summary, and yeah, it's a cool book. But I read it at the wrong time, I guess. This is also something that has been on my shelf for years. Um, it's just a collection made by Volker Michels, the guy who also wrote one of his biographies of Hermann Hesse, of like random writings, aphorisms, excerpts from letters and from his novels. But it didn't really completely click with me. I think some of the excerpts were a little bit too short. Yeah, sometimes you just have like a couple, just like a bunch of sentences really, and yeah, this was I love everything by Hermann Hesse, and I for some time I picked up everything that had his name on it. I don't really do that anymore, but yeah, not a bad book by any means, but not my favorite one of his collections. We get to that later actually. We have Mutter Courage und ihre Kinder by Bertolt Brecht, which is kind of an... I read this all the way in the beginning of the month. Good thing I'm taking notes. So this was... I have a soft spot for Bertolt Brecht. He was quite a political writer, and he was always like anti-war, and also he's my birthday twin. That's like why I kind of have a soft spot for him. But yeah, this is basically an anti-war play. It was written in 1939, so at the dusk or dawn, which one is in the morning? At the dawn of the Second World War. And he was in exile in Sweden, and he wrote this about I think it's the Swedish-Saxon War, which was like in the 1600s or something, but it's a parable obviously for the Second World War and for the First World War, and for any type of war really. He kind of likes to do that. He likes to write parables that can be applied to other situations too. Same thing with the good, what is it called in English? The Good Human of Szechuan, I think. And yeah, you got this this character of Mother Courage and her children, and she's a traveling merchant. She just goes around and sells things, and basically she profits off the war. She makes money by selling things to soldiers, by buying things from pillagers, and that kind of stuff. And eventually she loses all of her three kids in different circumstances to the war. Like one becomes a soldier. I don't actually remember, but yeah, and it kind of leaves her in a very abandoned, desolate, and sad state. And it's going it's going into the horrors of war from like a civilian's perspective and from like the perspective of someone who's trying to, it's not directly involved in the war but is trying to profit off of it. And yeah, it's definitely a cool play. I'm getting quite a good Brecht collection, and he's also, I think he's now one of the authors that if I see his name on something, I'm just gonna pick it up. Oh yeah, I'm always looking at my notes that I started taking. One interesting thing about this is that even though this is a play, this has like barely any scene descriptions at all. It just goes into like in front of a tent or like on the road, and it doesn't describe the scenes in any detail really, which I found quite interesting. Um, was deine Wut dir sagen will, what your anger is saying about you or something. This is from the Nonviolent Communication course by Marshall B. Rosenberg, and this is one of the two books I read for uni this month, because I'm doing a project about rage anger as like I'm doing like a social studies project about that, linked to creativity, and there were, I'm reading a couple of books for that, and it's a very good book. It's a very nice additional read to the nonviolent communication. I'm rating it kind of low because you can barely even call it a book. It's like a pamphlet, and this could have, the things that it said are very interesting, but this should have had like at least 100 more pages, I think. And being so short, it almost feels like kind of a cash grab, to be honest, because I don't think Marshall B. Rosenberg himself was really involved in the making of this. It's just citing some of his speeches and courses. But yeah, this has 48 pages of text. No, not even. Damn. 46 pages. This is just like other stuff. And this is the actual text, so I don't know. This should have been like at least twice as long, in my opinion. But definitely worthwhile read if you're into nonviolent communication. So, next up, Georges Simenon, der Mann, der den Zügen nachsah, the man who watched the trains go by. This is a crime novel, which I actually read two of this month. This was just something I picked up because I've heard the name Georges Simenon multiple times across other, afterwards of other books and stuff and introductions, and that at some point he was one of the most famous writers ever, and he is pretty much not being talked about anymore. And he seems to be quite an interesting character. He was like one of those crime writers, and he was very, very, very prolific. I think he wrote like, wait, it says here, he wrote a ton of books. I think he wrote like more than 200 books it took him 11 years to write 200 books. And I heard he usually spent like 2.5 weeks writing one. That being said, I actually really like this. This was quite well written. Basically, it's this guy who's just kind of. I wrote down, average Dutch guy is tired of his life, stops giving a fuck, and goes absolutely unhinged. His boss is being busted for like some fraud in like a cargo shipping company, and then his boss says to him like, well, you're like, what do you say, like my right hand, like he's also like in a leading position, and everybody's gonna assume that he was involved in this like big fraud thing. And then he's like, well, fuck it, I got nothing to lose, so he kills a prostitute, which is absolutely wild. And then he just kind of flees from the police, and he's very smart. His whole thing is like he sees everything as like a chess analogy, and he's like, know your opponent's next move, and have absolutely no system yourself. So he really does not get caught for a long time, and he sends letters to the police and to the news stations, and he kind of he wants to get some attention, and it's quite um, it's quite psychological. Um, and yeah, I think it's cool that we don't follow the police and trying to find out who the murderer is. It's quite the opposite. There's this policeman, and we don't really know who he is. We just know his name, and so it's kind of like a classic crime story in reverse, which I find very enjoyable to read. And I also, according to the story graph statistics, I'm one of the only people who thought that this was funny, but I think it really had some funny moments. He addresses his wife as Sie, like in German, the polite form that you only really use towards like strangers or figures of authority. And yeah, I think it has some funny moments. This book. The only thing that I really didn't get was the title. I don't see. I mean, there's trains mentioned a couple times. He goes places by train, but I don't see. I don't see how this title relates to anything happening in the book. But it needed, if you write 200 books, I guess you kind of need to pump out those titles a little bit. Well, next up we got Bats of the Republic by Zachary Thomas Dodson. This is quite a curious one. This is one of the most expensive books ever that I ever bought, which is just because it was pretty much impossible to attain in Europe. I imported this from the US from the... Wait, it says somewhere I think from the Denver Public Library, which is pretty funny, I think. And this is quite an experimental piece of writing. We basically have these two characters, Zeke Thomas and Zarek Thomas, and you might notice the similarity in name, and we have like this big family tree, and right here in the middle is actually the actual author. So he kind of writes this about his fictional ancestors and descendants. So one story is set in like the mid 1800s, and the other one is set about 120 years in the future. And yeah, so we on one hand we have this kind of in the past story, you have this odyssey of this tragic romance story, like quite typical for writing of that time, like this man who's in love with this woman and he can't be with her, and he goes on a quest to find something for her father who's his boss, and he gets kind of lost there, and he starts and he's also like he's interested in zoology and biology, and he starts drawing all these animals, and the bats especially are very dear to him, and then he kind of goes mad, and it has a lot of pictures in here, so it's kind of like I looked at this book as like a multimedia art piece because it has quite a lot of stuff going on there. And then the future story is kind of like a totalitarian 1984 type of deal of like this surveillance state that they're trying to flee. And yeah, this was definitely a high concept book. And I've been saying before, sometimes for like books with such a pronounced concept, the story itself isn't really all that important. And I really did like this. This doesn't... Oh, it says here, Denver Public Library. This didn't have the best reviews ever, but I guess if I would rate it purely as like a normal novel, I think the big characters in the story could have used a little bit of work. But if you see it as what it is, as like an art piece, this has like... Let me show you this. In the end, it has this letter that you read, which is kind of like the big answer to everything. and you read it, it kind of intertwines the two stories, and you have to read it as a Mobius strip. You kind of put it like this, and then you read it like that. And this is such an original thing. I've never seen. I don't think anyone has ever done this before. And yeah. And for that, I can look over some little story issues. So yeah, a very, very cool experimental book that I did quite enjoy. And now I can't close this again. I got 4 more books here. So we got Buddenbrooks by Thomas Mann. I started this last month, and it obviously took me quite a while to read. Oof. How do I even talk about this without making this way too long? Well, let me briefly tell you. It has the subtitle "The Decline of a Family." So it's one of those family sagas across multiple generations. And it's basically it's getting worse. Very similar to, well, not very similar, but concept-wise very similar to 100 Years of Solitude. You have like a bunch of characters from this old trader family, and there's all this tradition and all this old money, and they have like multiple houses and stuff, and yeah, then things happen. There's feuds. There's people being married unhappily. There's kids, and well, basically, it kind of ends with like the last descendant of the family dying, which is kind of a spoiler. But this book is over 100 years old, so I don't care. And you can also kind of tell the whole time if you read it. In my opinion, this could have used a family tree, because for most of the book I didn't really understand who's who and who's related to who in which way. So there's a family tree online, but in my opinion it just could have been in the book. It just makes it easier to understand. Yeah, so I feel like either I just don't do the book justice or I make a whole video about this, but yeah, the more I read from Thomas Mann, the more I get like his motifs and stuff, and one very big thing is the passing of time, which happens in a really weird way. It's linear, but sometimes, in the middle of a chapter, all of a sudden, like 2 years have passed, or 5 years have passed, or sometimes just a couple weeks have passed, and there's like no indication really, sometimes. And this story is set over the course of like 50 years, and yeah, it's also the same in The Magic Mountain, which, by the way, I liked a little bit more, or maybe a lot more. But yeah, so you have like, you read a chapter and then the next chapter, all of a sudden it's 2 years later. So that's quite interesting. And he's writing about illness and death and recovery, and obviously the Magic Mountain is set in a sanatorium, but also all of his other stuff is kind of deals with like illness and having to be taken care of and stuff. A lot of the characters in this book have some sort of health issues, and I feel like other people could do a better job at really reviewing this. I'll just tell you, this house here, that's a real house in Lübeck, where Thomas Mann is from, and I tried to go there, but it's under construction right now. I think that would have been pretty cool to have take a video there. But I think I might go there by the time it opens back up. There's also a Günter Grass house there, so yeah, that may be coming up at some point. If you're a fan of Thomas Mann, definitely check this out. This is within the German-speaking realm. This is his most famous novel, more famous than The Magic Mountain. So yeah, definitely worth reading. Alright, I got three more. We got Schmetterlinge by Hermann Hesse, which another collection of his, which I like way more. This has very nice poems, this has excerpts, this has letters, this has all kinds of things. I think it was also made by Volker Michels, by the same guy. It also has a ton of pictures of butterflies in it, and it was just a lovely collection, which I very very much enjoyed, and also some poems of his which I've never read before. And he was really into like collecting butterflies and that, and I find that very funny, like the image of this like grumpy, bitter, introverted old man just like jumping around and catching butterflies. I think that's kind of cute. And also for art class at uni, I made like a big painting, which I'm not really like too happy with this, to be honest, but I had these like stamps with like letters, and I stamped one of his poems on here, and then I also drew some butterflies from the book. So yeah, not my favorite painting that I've ever made, but just something I wanted to show you. And then, all the way in the very beginning of the month, I finally got around to reading Blue Remembered Star by Bren Booth Jones. And I'm just getting into poetry. And this was something I really enjoyed. I mean, I am kind of biased because I won this in the raffle that Bren did on his channel. And he's one of my favorite booktubers. And I rated this 5 stars. But I was also like, I want him to have like good reviews and to be successful. So that might have influenced my reading. But I genuinely thought that this was a really cool collection. I wrote here his a Joycean vocabulary, like the words he uses. Sometimes he uses words in a very interesting context, or he uses very like uncommon words. I found it very enjoyable to read, and I, not being a native speaker, still had no trouble understanding it. And he's like capturing all these like everyday, almost mundane moments, but it's like he's almost like he's taken a photograph, because he's taken, for example, this one is called Lovesick in the Park. It's pretty much just about like having a picnic in the park and eating something. It's circled. An ant shoulders a crumb up the analogy of my ankle. Notes towards a ghost-written memoir. I don't know where you are, but I hope you belong. I don't know if the wind still blows through you, like it blew through me, through we. But I hope you healed. I hope you turned that shattering to song. That is like goosebump inducing in my opinion. And a very, very interesting and cool collection of poems. And it kind of made me pick up his other books. I think he wrote 2 more. So that was a big hit for me. And then, all the way high up, I wasn't really sure how to rate this, but I just put it all the way on top. The Crying of Lot 49 by Thomas Pynchon, which was my reread for this month. I gotta say, a lot of people dislike this book, and I do 100% get why. This is deliberately written in a very complicated way, which is usually a big turnoff for me, which is usually something that I really hate when authors do that, especially in like an academic context. But in this, it kind of felt like, not entirely serious. I don't feel like there's any deep meaning hidden in this book. I just feel like it's kind of explorative and kind of intentionally like labyrinthine, intertwined, and complicated, which I think was pretty funny. And I will say I understood way more of the plot than the first time I was reading this, and I still didn't even nearly understand everything. I looked up a summary and it was talking about this stamp collection as like a really big plot point, and I had no idea that there was even a stamp collection in this book. I wrote down you could, if you really wanted to interpret this, there is this psychologist who's really into these LSD trials that a lot of psychologists did in the 60s, and several people go mad because of it. If you really wanted to, you could interpret it kind of linked to that, but I don't think... I wrote down probably no deeper meaning, just funny and weird. And yeah, everything, well, that kind of feeds into the psychedelics theory, but everything seems to kind of be connected within each other, and there's so many things going on at the same time. It's very overstimulating. For example, this book has my favorite sex scene I've ever read in it, where the protagonist meets up with her lawyer in a hotel room, and he used to be a child actor turned lawyer, and then she turns the TV on, and by chance there's a movie that he starred in as a child being shown, and then so they watch the movie. They're playing strip poker kind of at the same time, and then there's also like this teenager band playing right outside their window, and they have all their instruments plugged into their, like, through their window into their power outlets, and all of these things are described at exactly the same time, and they're kind of playing this sexual game, and then you constantly have the noise and the music from outside, and then this movie which they keep talking about the whole time, and then the music going wild, people like dying horribly in the movie, and the protagonist being covered in all of her clothes. It's absolutely hilarious and one of the weirdest things I've ever read. So definitely something that takes a little bit of work to get through, but in my opinion it's really worth it, and it's just like a kind of a funny thing. And so yeah, that was it. I'll do another video on my top 5, which I'm kind of spoiling here a little bit. That'll be probably up next week or something. But yeah, this challenge was obviously like a little bit silly. Like, what does it mean to read 100 pages a day? Obviously, 100 pages of this are different from 100 pages of this, but it was just like something funny to do, and I hope I kind of can get back to my normal pace, so that this is not gonna be my life forever now. But yeah, let me know what you think about reading so much in a really short time. Can you really get the same out of these books if you're kind of binge reading them? I feel like I did, but I might be wrong. And so yeah, see you in the next one, and thank you very much for watching.